Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, everybody, it's my pleasure to introduce our lecturer, Peter Crampton. He's an economist from the University of Maryland and works a lot on very real practical auctions, including like spectrum auctions and this top-level domain auction that he'll tell us about today. I met him first in Burton Noro, maybe 10 years ago? I don't know, I guess not that long ago.
No, at least.
And
you were
I'm not
only
that
this
old.
tall.
And I am 9 in Fibonacci, as Peter pointed out in my birthday card yesterday, and Peter is 10 in Fibonacci. So
now you know how old we are.
You can think about that. And he's been really great welcoming computer scientists to the ICANN community. So it's my pleasure to have him here at Microsoft.
Good. Thank you very much, Nicole. It's really a great pleasure to be here. And today I'm going to talk about something that definitely is related to what you folks do. And in fact, one of the participants in the auction that I'm going to describe is Microsoft. So it's definitely relevant. And my bottom line message of the day is that market design is an incredibly powerful tool with which to impact the world in quite positive ways. And this is going to be an example of how market design can be harnessed to answer real pressing problems and come to conclusions. And it might not be perfect, but it actually is pretty darn good. So that's my overall message, and I'm a huge fan. As Nicole said, I've worked in a lot of different industries, and this is one of the applications. But as I look out in the world, what I see is an enormous transformation of our capability with respect to running and managing markets. And I think that if we have more voices like this group, essentially screaming out what is obviously right, that we will have some impact. Not everywhere, but some places. And that's going to actually be enough. So that's my bottom line message. And now we'll turn to the exact topic of applicant auctions for top-level domains. And this is a project that is dear to my heart because it's actually a wonderful application of a very early paper that I did, Crampton, Gibbons, Klemperer, on dissolving a partnership efficiently. And essentially what that looks at is if we've got a group with arbitrary ownership rights for something, and the question is, it becomes time to dissolve. So we need to transfer the ownership rights, which are held as a collective, to one party or potentially multiple parties. How can we do that efficiently? And the answer is yes, we can, as long as the ownership rights are not too asymmetric. We have the Meyerson-Satterthwaite result that says that actually in the bargaining problem you can't. You can't do it. And in fact, in an auction environment, you can't do it either. And that might be surprising to some of you because you think that, well, we can hold an efficient auction, can't we? Well, you actually can't hold an efficient auction if the seller has private information as well. So when you have two-sided private information on both the sell and the buy side, then Meyerson and Satterthwaite kicks in, even in the auction setting, regardless of the extent of competition. But the interesting thing about Crampton, Gibbons, Klemperer is it says that, well, in fact, that is coming from the asymmetry in the ownership structure. And if we have more symmetric ownership, then in fact we can get full efficiency. Here you'll see is a setting where we have common ownership. And in fact, the partnership is equally held. And so conducting an efficient auction is certainly possible. And as long as we have some amount of symmetry ex ante. Okay, so first thing economists like to talk about is the market structure. So what does this market look like that we're talking about? Well, we're going to be auctioning top-level domains, and I'll explain why in a moment. And ICANN is the one that's the organizing body of this whole process. And these are the top-level domains that people have applied for. So ICANN said, look, you guys want top-level domains. Okay, you like .com, .org, .edu, but we want some others like .book, .app. So go ahead and apply, and it'll be $185,000 per application for each string that you name. And they do that so that they don't get millions of applications. They get thousands of applications. So in fact, 1,930 applications at that price. So that's the way it worked. The applications came in and were opened up and set in stone in last spring.
What was if two people want to talk book?
So that's exactly what we're going to say. Yeah, exactly. So
Otherwise, we can solve it.
that's right. Yes.
It was already
So yeah. So what is the word cloud here? So the word cloud actually is a wonderful way to represent market structure of almost anything. And so here, what I'm using it for is to show you each of the strings for which there is contention. That is, there's multiple applicants for each of these top-level domains. The size, the number of applicants, exactly. So the most popular one turned out to be .app. There were 13 applications. For most of them, there's just 2. And some there's 3, some there's 4, and then it goes all the way up to 13. So we basically have a small number of bidders for each one, but we've got lots of them that we're going to do. Yes?
Sorry, so what does it even mean to own a top-level domain? And I guess I know a bit about, I guess ICANN, that's...
Yes.
But I don't really, like... Okay, so they've just made whatever, they made however much money on this, right? $100 million?
Well, 36 million would be the application fees. But they're a nonprofit. They're a nonprofit organization, so they're not actually interested in the money. They're just, the 185K was to limit the number of applications. That's all.
Okay,
So,
yeah,
and what it means, is basically like if you have, so Microsoft, guess what they applied for? .Microsoft, right? So Microsoft can and operate a domain .Microsoft, and the advantage for Microsoft of that is then, and there was no competition for that, and the advantage for Microsoft is that then they can operate it as a closed domain. And basically, any customer that goes to, they see .Microsoft, they know, okay, this is something that Microsoft is blessed, it's a site, it's approved, and so on. And that creates value for Microsoft. Now, it's true that you could almost get the same value, couldn't you, from Microsoft.com, but...
It's, for our purposes, it's probably the same. Doesn't really matter, right? If it was app.com or .app.
Well, apparently it does matter. And so, I don't know why. Believe me, there's a lot of interest in this. And so people do value these things. And then just another example, say .book. So Google and Amazon are competing for .book, as are several others. And it's clear that .Microsoft or .Apple, they're going to be operated as closed domains. So it'll be managed internally, and if you want to do porn on .Microsoft, you're just going to be out of luck. Microsoft is not going to let you, I don't think. But .book, if Google gets .book, or Amazon, it's a little bit unclear, but could well be that it's going to be operated as an open domain, which means that they would actually welcome anyone that wants to have a URL that ends .book.
I want to still understand the rules of this game, which is when I applied a year ago or whatever, what was I promised when I gave you the $150,000 or whatever it was, and I applied for .box, and now there are 3 people who apply for .box. Did you guarantee me anything? You said if there are 3, you can have your money back. What were the rules?
So the rules were, they're laid out in the guidebook. And the guidebook is quite clear about what the rules are. And this is one thing that ICANN actually did very well, is that they had a deliberative process where they laid out exactly what the rules were and published them so that you could participate. And the rules are basically say this, just summarizing them. You want to apply, you give us $185,000. We will look at your application and we'll either reject it or it will pass the initial evaluation, and then it will go on to a final evaluation. In the event that multiple people apply for the same domain, .book, then there will be we would urge the private parties to resolve the contention among themselves. In the event you fail to resolve the contention, the conflict, then we will hold a last resort auction. In the last resort auction, it will be a simultaneous ascending clock auction, which is an efficient auction in this context, for first order approximation. Certainly in simple environments it is. And where ICANN will collect the revenues from the winners, and the losers will get nothing. They won't get refunded the $185K in particular. Now, if you want your $185K refunded, then that's fine. You can't get the full refund, but what you can do, if you turn in your application, void your application in advance of our initial evaluation, we will return 70% of the $185K. And so they're basically taking 30% up front. The 70% they will give back, and if you void your application. So there's an incentive for these guys to actually not only resolve the conflict, but resolve it before the initial evaluation.
Which is over.
The initial evaluation takes place and is not over. The only thing that's over so far is the applications. So the application is fixed. Yes.
How many bids there were and from whom?
Everything is public. In fact, you're going to see it. I mean, right here, there you see the names in contention.
Right.
And the next thing is the bidders. Who are the bidders? There they are. We know exactly who the bidders are. And yes, donuts, they're the biggest. Now, who can find Microsoft? This is a test.
What is donuts? Bottom left.
So Microsoft should be over here somewhere.
Yeah, up about 3 lines.
Up.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
It is, Microsoft.
There you go. So what is donuts? So donuts.
Consortium of,
No, donuts is it's a consortium of investors. But the lead investor is somebody that's made tens of millions of dollars in the domain registry business. So he's actually a domain registrant who's made a lot of money in this space and is very well versed on what's going on and can evaluate what things are worth and actually intends to own and operate numerous domains as part of a viable business.
Donuts not bid on Microsoft and try to then get money out of Microsoft.
Okay, so the reason is there's special conditions with respect to trademark, geography, and community. So you can basically check in your application various boxes. So when you apply for .Microsoft, then you check trademark. And what's going to happen is there's going to be this process, and we're going to have some debate about, I'm going to say that, well, come on, it's a trademark? Are you kidding me? And you'll actually ultimately win that argument. Whereas .apple actually is a little bit more problematic because the Washington apple growers can actually say, well, what do you mean .apple? So that's kind of interesting. But actually, I think Apple is the only one that applied for .apple. Same thing, geographic.London. London has the city of London, and I'm not talking about Ontario. I'm talking about across the pond. That London will have priority. And there are some issues like with respect to .Africa, because who represents Africa? But and then community. So there's things like .basketball or .tennis, and actually some of those people check boxes community, that it's that they or so there's all these other things. But most of these, if we go back, most of these strings are sort of clearly commercial strings, and none of those boxes are really relevant, although they may try to say that there is some relevance. Now,
is that .girl?
Yes. And .xxx is not there because that one is already out. Yeah, there you go. As you can see, donuts is by far the largest. In fact, donuts is involved in 72.1% of the domains under contention. So they're a very big player. And the second biggest is Google. Minds and Machines is third, and so on. Amazon's also a big player. So this is, one of the nice things is we know exactly what the market structure is, and we've got actually all these items that we're auctioning. They're interrelated, but it actually is should be a fairly easy auction environment. There's not, really strong complementarities, and yes, there may be some. So there might be some amount of room for packaging, but I believe we can accommodate that. Okay, so here it is, 1930 applications, 755 contested applications, 232 contested domains. So that's essentially how many auctions have to be run. And there's just 145 applicants holding contested applications. So that's the whole set. So it's this is it's a lot of people, and they're dispersed around the world, but it's a manageable number, which is nice. And here is the number of applications for the contested, the histogram. And you can see that the mode is 2, and the 2, 3. If you can basically have an auction that works well with 2, 3, and 4, you've got a good plan there, because that's the vast majority of the domains. I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on this plan and describe a whole bunch of things. So don't get too scared. I do have lots of slides, but I probably won't get to all of them. But I do want to explain sort of the basic structure and what's going on. So essentially what this is all about is, and I in fact got a phone call from one of the applicants, happened to be Donuts, and they asked me, they said, look, we'd like you to look into this. We either would like to consider hiring you as an expert or to help them in figuring out, strategizing the situation, or alternatively, you could organize a private auction to facilitate the market. And I said, well, I often do serve as an expert, but in this case, I would actually really like to be the market facilitator. So I will design a plan for a private auction, and will develop that, and that'll be my contribution. And so thank you very much, but I don't want any relationship with donuts, I'd rather work with everybody. So I'm going to be a facilitator on behalf of all applicants. So that's the plan. That's where we come. And then I enlisted the support, the help of Bob Wilson, who I suspect most of you know, and then several others. So the idea is we've got this actually very nice environment. We've got a fixed market structure. We've got and I'm entering, the problem that I'm solving is sort of like beginning today. In fact, this happened, just to give you the speed of how quickly things can be analyzed, developed, tested, and so on. I got this phone call at the end of August. Okay, and right now we're at the end of November. And you'll see a lot of work has already taken place. My task is to try to convince the applicant community that the private plan that I'm proposing is in their interest and is better than the alternatives, which would be a different private plan, which could be a negotiation or perhaps barter exchanges or some other auction, or the last resort auction. So those are the alternatives that my competitors. And so now let me describe, and we know what the last resort auction is. It's the simultaneous ascending clock. And so now I'll describe my plan. I say my plan, just so our plan, where R is all my co-authors and the many other people that are involved as well. Okay, so right now we're in the auction design stage. So we're designing how this auction should work, how the plan should work, and there's a lot of development. There's the auction platform that has to be developed and tested and so on, and education. Now education, and basically this plan, the reason I'm going to talk through it is that it basically lays out a particular method to market design that I think is especially effective in many applications. So this design phase is very important, and the biggest part of it is education. Education in market design is absolutely key. You have to, there's going to be stakeholders out there, and you have to get the stakeholders on board, and the only way to get them on board is to educate them. And that's actually the nice thing. If you've got a good proposal and you're doing an efficient market and high transparency, low transactions costs, you know, it's basically, that's why you can say education as opposed to manipulation. Now, if I was an investment banker, I'd probably want to strike out the word education. I would say manipulation of stakeholders. Or, sorry, apologize to the investment bankers in the room and in the world. But you know, in this case, it really is education, I think. Now, the next step is consultation. So the consultation step, and this is very much like a regulatory process that we would have in a regulated industry like radio spectrum for mobile phones. The FCC, in the case of the United States, would go through a regulatory process like this, or in electricity markets and so on. We have the same sort of regulatory process, where first there's design, a plan is formed, and then it's communicated to the participants, and then there's consultation. You basically say, okay, participants, what do you guys think? And of course, in this design phase right now, I'm in constant communication with the applicants. And so I'm talking to people all the time about, well, how it should be done and so on. And I'm taking their feedback. But this consultation step is a formal step where they get to submit formal comments, either privately or publicly, under a particular schedule. the biggest event in the consultation step is the development of the plan, the publishing of the plan, and then the explaining of the plan in a full-day conference. And so that's going to take place on December 18th in Santa Monica. Why then? Why there? Well, the reason is ICANN is holding a prioritization draw on December 17th at the Hilton LAX. And what is that about? Well, that draw is essentially a random process. It's a raffle. They're going to do a public raffle to determine the order in which the initial evaluations will occur, which will take several months. And the sooner you have that uncertainty resolved, that actually puts you one step along the road to getting the domain. So this is actually very nice. And you'd like to be first. Everybody would like to be first. But it's deliberative, and so it will take time. And that's why. Why?
First? I mean, don't they make a commitment to go through all of them?
Yes, they do. So they will go through all of them, but it's better first than later because you've resolved that uncertainty that much sooner, and then you can start investing in for example, most of them, you're the sole, it's not in contention. So then basically you've got it, and you can start investing in it.
Shouldn't they do all the contended ones?
You can start investing now, that's right, and you may not get it.
Why?
So,
I'm the only contestants. Why am I not pretty sure I get it? I know
If you're the
that.
only contestant, you know you're
because you look pretty shady, so we may just throw you out.
So shouldn't they do all
Yes.
the uncontested evaluations first?
Yeah, so that would be one possibility, except for they know that the contested ones are the ones that are valuable, and one might argue, as an economist, that you'd actually want to do the valuable stuff first. And given if they all take 2 days to do, then do the valuable ones first to get that resolved.
They might become uncontested after the evaluation, right? If they rule out one of the applicants.
That's right. So there's a lot of things here, and they basically couldn't figure out what to do, so they're going to do a raffle. Now, why a raffle? And because they're doing it under California law, which allows nonprofits to do raffles, but you have to be physically present. So everybody has to show up to be physically present under the law. And so that's why, and I believe in low transactions costs. And so given that they're physically there on the 17th, on the 18th, I'm going to take them to the beach, which is much nicer than the Hilton LAX, and we're going to have an applicant auction conference. And the structure of the conference is basically my explaining how the plan works, then the others on the team explaining the legal contracting, how the legal aspects are handled, and then the most important part of the conference is a nearly full-scale mock auction where they actually get to play the game. So in fact, they're going to be playing the game. I'm going to give them roles. They'll bid in teams of 2, and they'll get prizes for doing for those that you'll get a higher probability of a prize if you make a surprisingly large amount of profit in the auction, given your role. And so, essentially, it's a field experiment, and the whole thing can be done it does take several hours because we have to explain how it works. They have to get comfortable with the software, and then they do it. It is incredibly powerful instrument in terms of education. People actually, in fact, almost everything we do, we learn by doing. We don't learn by getting lectured about it. So, here I am lecturing you, but sorry. you know, if you want to learn to play tennis, you don't have somebody lecture to you about how to strike the ball and so on. You actually have to get out on the court and do it. And it's the same thing participating in a high-stake auction. You have to practice. And so anybody that knows what they're doing should be, when they're participating in something they've never done before, they should be practicing. And that's what folks do when they participate in spectrum auctions, what they should be doing, you know, in all sorts of environments. This is really effective for them to think about it strategically. They're actually making the decisions, and then they see, oh my God, this actually works. And in fact, it's not that complicated. And in fact, it only took me 10 minutes to figure out how to use this software. So all that stuff is really hugely important. And that takes place. And then we have a discussion, a panel from the stakeholders with essentially what do they think, Q&A. And then after that, then there's an opportunity for them to supply written comments, public or private, to the design team, which is myself and Bob Wilson and so on. And then we take their comments into account. We adjust the plan however we see fit, and we publish the final plan, including the auction rules and so on, and all the draft contracts. Then we have commitment. There's a date certain in January at which folks have to say yay or nay with respect to the first applicant auction. For all domains for which it's unanimous, yay, they want to do it, then we will auction that domain in the first applicant auction.
And that's a binding.
And it's binding, right. So, and we make it binding by when they say yay, they make it credible by turning over their application to the escrow agent. And then the escrow agent will so it's actually very simple, straightforward, which is really nice. Performance is, in contracts, measuring performance is a real issue. Not in auctions. In auctions, you know, essentially a high-stake auction is a contract, but we have performance that's black and white. You know, did you participate in the auction? Yes or no? We know what you did. Did you win the auction? Did you pay the amount you were supposed to? So the performance is all black and white, so it's trivial for the escrow agent to follow the contract, and there's no litigation and so on. It's all very clean. So that is, so that's one side of it. So it is binding. There's a second binding element, and that is, and actually not, so why are we having two? The reason we're having two, it has to do with the 70% of the application fee that you get back in the event that you resolve this, you void your application before the initial evaluation results. So that's what this first one's about. But quite frankly, I don't see the very high valued domains going in this first one. And the reason for that is because the transactions cost is trivial compared to the value of the domain, and they would actually like to have the resolution of the initial evaluation before they determine anything else, because, you know, let's say .app, well, I actually think that 5 of the 13 are really sleazy applicants that aren't going to pass the initial application. I'm just making this up, but they're probably all wonderful people. But you know, one could imagine one had that in their head, and so in that case, you actually want to have the resolution be between the 13 minus 5, 7, rather than the I'm sorry, 8. That's why I'm an economist and you're a computer scientist. So that's why we do the first one. This also actually has a great advantage in terms of further education, because the first, this would be, let's say you're a portfolio player, you had 50 domains. you'd love to have some practice in a real life situation, not just the mock auction. And the first gives you an opportunity to do it. So you can take some of your lower value domains, say, yeah, I'll do it for these lower value ones, but .book and .app, I'm going to hold off on those. We'll do those later. And so that's what I expect to have happen in the first auction. The second one takes place after the initial evaluation. So now we know whether, who's been thrown out and who's still in the running. And other uncertainties have been resolved that I don't need to go into. But of course, it's better to hold auctions after you've resolved uncertainty, if at all possible. In this case, there's actually a cost to waiting. And so that's why we have the first one. But the second one is there. Now, in the second one, it's going to be the same thing. We're going to have, the education will be easier. We'll just have a little webinar because everybody's already familiar with it. Then we'll, commitment date, yay or nay. And now there's actually two elements to the commitment. One is if you say yay and everybody else says yay, then you're committed to participate in the second applicant auction. If somebody says, one or more says no, then you're committed by being one of the yays to not negotiate with the others, which means that if it's not unanimous, it's going to the last resort auction. Because if it's not unanimous, then we do the last resort auction. So what that does, it may sound heavy-handed, but in fact, it's directly addressing a very serious problem that's quite common within economics and real life, which is holdout. Okay, anytime you need, you got 5 guys and all 5 have to say yes, then essentially, and if all 5 say yes, you just create enormous value, then basically I want you 4 to say yes, and then I'll say, oh, okay, well, I'm Mr. 5. If I say yes too, I will create all this value, and I'm happy to split it 50-50, but, I'm not, like 20%, are you crazy? No way. 50-50, come on. So that's the holdout problem, and this directly addresses it. Now, in terms of the auction design, we're going to actually look.
There's a commitment problem here because couldn't your people all sign that, but then 4 of them will go to a back room and say, fine, we just do it anyhow.
They gave the escrow paper.
Yeah. So they basically, they gave the escrow. So that.
Going to do if you hold this for escrow papers, these escrow papers, and the 4 are sort of saying we don't want anymore? Are you really?
Then we have a contract. We basically, I've got your application, and I don't hold it. The trustee holds it. The trustee turns your voided application over to ICANN, and
so now there's only one person left.
There's one person left, and they got it. The trustee is bound by they're an international law firm. They're bound by contracts, and these are very simple contracts.
I come to actually back you up.
ICANN actually, we need very little from ICANN. If ICANN, one way to do this is actually through their ICANN process of logins and passwords and so on, so there's various ways, but there's simple mechanical ways to address, without any participation by ICANN of any form. So the question, auction design. We'll look at several, but I'm going to tell you the punchline here is, guess what? We're going to do simultaneous ascending clock. The exact same auction format as the last resort.
Except that now ICANN gets the money.
Yes. The two differences. One, it happens sooner, so we get to resolve the uncertainty months before. Second, there's definitely value there. Second, the buyer's payment is split among the sellers. So rather than having, in the last resort auction, we have winners and losers. In the applicant auction, we have buyers and sellers. We have no losers. There's only winners. Everybody's a winner. And in fact, yes, this dominates. So this mechanism dominates the last resort auction. And that's very nice. And it's pretty unusual in economic environments where you can have complete domination. You know, Pareto efficiency is usually something that's, you know, there's lots of different Pareto outcomes, but making everybody better off is actually something that's hard to do. This does it. So why didn't
ICANN do that?
So why didn't ICANN do it? ICANN could do it, but they. I don't know why they didn't do it, but I do know that they have a very difficult time making these complicated decisions. But they did. It was a stroke of brilliance for them to define the last resort auction, which did what Ronald Coase instructed them to do, which is define the property rights. Once they define the property rights, then the parties can negotiate efficiently among themselves, assuming they've got some fairly low-cost method of negotiation. And what I'm providing them is that very low-cost method of negotiation, an efficient auction. So that's basically the plan.
So
and
who pays your ticket to LA and the beach hotel?
Pardon? With yeah.
Who pays your ticket to LA?
Okay. So yeah. So I'm actually yeah. So I'm paid on commission, and the commission rate is variable depending upon the volume, but it's anticipated that the commission will be, there's a ceiling to the commission, and so it actually will be likely less than 1%, which is extremely small for of the buyers, some of buyer payments.
At the end.
Yeah, at the end. Yeah. So it is very low cost. I mean, yeah, it pays for the plane ticket, even if I go business class. Okay, so yeah, and there is a floor too. Yeah, you're right. There's a floor and a ceiling. Anytime you agree to a ceiling, you should agree to a floor. But it's actually a soft floor. It can actually go all the way to 0. So then I'm in trouble. Okay, so this is the example where the lower value domains, the dot not so wonderful, go first to save the transactions cost, and then the higher value domains, the dot wonderfuls, go later. Now. Benefits, we get the early resolution of uncertainty, which is good. They can start making investments. We get efficient assignment, so it goes to the guy who values it the most. We get the money, the buyer's payment stays within the group, so it goes to the sellers. And that has a big incentive effect. Basically, it discourages buyers from bidding high. In an auction where we've got winners and losers, as a potential buyer, you're very motivated because if you don't win, you lose. And losing is a bad thing. In this case, losing is not such a bad thing, and the higher the price goes up, it all of a sudden starts to look better and better to be the seller rather than the buyer. And so that motivates lower prices. Pardon?
I mean, can I join on these domains?
No, you can't. It's over. It's done. Yeah. So I would love to. Yeah. I wish I applied for .book and maybe .app. There's too many people applied for that, but .book, and there's many of them that are really nice. That I'm sure will be well worth the 185 investment. But it's too late. That's done. It was finalized in the spring. Yeah. So long time ago.
So,
yes.
So one thing I don't quite understand the rationale for is why was the commitment process? I'm assuming that was a sealed process.
So the commitment.
Why not make that an open? I see who else is committed.
Either. So basically anyone can make a public commitment or a private commitment, and their choice. The only rule is the commitment has to be finalized by date certain.
So you're allowing them to
Yes.
do cheap talk and
Yeah, that's right.
there are no
yes.
antitrust issues with this type of thing?
So there are potentially, actually I'm talking with the Department of Justice Antitrust Division tomorrow. And there's always issues, but this is actually squeaky clean in terms of a process, and I suspect there'll be rapid resolution on this, in that I think if you look at this, you'll see it's definitely pro-competitive. We're getting the domains out quickly. We're creating a lot of social value by getting the domains out quickly to the guys that value it the most. And there is, I am not, as a market facilitator, I'm not a monopoly market facilitator. Any of you who would like to compete with me are welcome. You can do that. You're welcome to. I wish you well. It's just it's just up to you. So anybody that's got and there are competitors out there. So
Competitor with exactly the same auction.
Are we sure?
So yeah, you could. There's some of this that I have some intellectual property over. So we might have some debate with respect to that. But if you wanted to do some other the auction your way, or whatever, you could do that. Yes, aside from the intellectual property that I have, then you certainly could do whatever you want. So it's basically open open competition. So there should be.
The descending auction can't be your intellectual property.
So you'd be surprised.
We patented things too.
That's actually right.
It's not hard to patent.
No, I know. Yeah, I believe we hold the patents for ascending auctions and descending auctions, and I'm sure that you hold such patents as well. Yes, we all make these claims. Yes.
So how do you build a transaction fee without distorting efficiency?
Have the buyer's payment go to the sellers without distorting efficiency? So yeah, that's a good question.
Your fee.
Oh, my fee?
Yeah, it's so small, no one.
Oh, it's so small. It's trivial. Yeah. We don't want to talk about my fee. It's too small. Below 1%.
If you have a domain with 3 participants and there is one buyer and 2 sellers, do the 2 sellers get it equally, or is it proportional to what they bid on? Or
A good question. So what would you want to do? So initially, basically the 2 rules that the applicants discussed. And it was interesting because they thought that the proportionate rule would be fair because, look, if you're some fly-by-night, you bring no value to the table, you're just a speculator, then why the domain's worthless to you. Why should you get a equal share of the buyer's payment? And the answer is because if you don't, you really have just damaged the incentives. So if you make it proportionate, then you've got very strong incentives for the pure speculator to push the price up. With equal share, the incentives to push the price up, there's some incentive there, as you'll see in a second, but it's not that strong, and it's actually just for the really low value guys. So it's there are different possibilities. I can't say that we've analyzed all possible cases, but the little bit of analysis that we have done suggests that the equal shares works phenomenally well. And I'll be specific about that in just a moment. Okay, objectives. Yes?
Do you have any combinatorial aspect
No.
of that? So for example,
Yes.
due to antitrust, so would Google be allowed to buy, so it might be domains Google couldn't buy because it would violate antitrust, because people might say, well, you can't amass all that would.
So, so that's the case that, so if ICANN could say that, for whatever reason through their process, they could say that, it's okay for this domain to exist, but not for you to hold it.
Not to hold at least all domains which have to do with search.
That's right. Yeah. So there could be something like that. So all these objectives could be. It can be discussed. There's a process, and ICANN will make decisions on that stuff.
And people can comment to ICANN.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So let me just continue. Yes, they can comment on it, and they can. Lots of discussion. So any market design, you want to start with objectives. There's 4 objectives that I love and try to pursue almost in every market design application. They are efficiency, fairness, transparency, and simplicity. Those are 4 that I just carry around, and they, what I'm going to propose, I believe, does accomplish these 4 objectives, and this is what the design team is focused on. Now, this is going to illustrate the power of theory, and in particular mechanism design, in answering questions such as what should the payment rule be and the sharing rule. So it turns out this is the analysis for equal shares, and I'm going to argue that it supports efficiency and fairness objectives. So here's a class, an important class of problems. It's independent private value, okay, and symmetry. So all values are drawn from the same distribution. I say uniform distribution here, but it actually can be a general distribution for certain things, and I'll say in a moment. Okay, but what this proposition says is that actually first price or second price auction, so pricing rule would be one of the things we could consider. First, there's a unique equilibrium, the outcome is X plus efficient, and each bidder's profit is invariant to the pricing rule. Okay, so this is a revenue equivalence result. We actually get the same, essentially the bidders through their strategizing just jiggle things so we get the exact same outcome in expected terms on an interim basis. So after you have your private information. So every type of every bidder is indifferent when they're playing the unique Bayesian-Nash equilibrium. So that's actually, that's incredible that you have that result. And this, for this special case, is, and in fact, that result extends to any distribution when we have just 2 parties. When we have 3 parties, when there's 3 applicants, then it doesn't extend. But actually notice that a majority of our domains under contention are 2. Okay, so next, so actually when I presented something like this at NBR, one party in the audience said, oh, this is obvious that revenue equivalence holds. Okay, so here's theorem, revenue equivalence doesn't hold.
This is also obvious.
This is also obvious. Yes. Okay, so because I was basically surprised by the revenue equivalence result. That didn't. I was quite surprised. I wasn't expecting it because the objective's different. Revenue equivalence has many things involved, but one of them is the quasi-linear objective. And effectively, we've got a new term, which is the money I'm getting back as seller. That whole new term is this thing that's been injected, and so how you get revenue equivalence is quite amazing. And it turns out you don't get revenue equivalence in general. And here's just effectively a counterexample. But the basic intuition of revenue equivalence, that people make adjustments, and so it's the the pricing rule. So essentially, what you want is a pricing rule that leads to good price discovery and has other desirable aspects, and perhaps generalizes to instances beyond independent private value. So that was the proof. We just went over it very quickly. So then we do a horse race between all competing designs. And the 2 competing designs are sequential first price sealed bid auction. Okay, and the reason first price has some legitimacy here, normally first price is, it's problematic because of all the bid distortion. Well, in second price, people have an incentive to distort their bids because they're getting the money back. So that's actually not an argument for second price versus first price. The argument for second price is actually the price discovery when you're doing lots of things simultaneously, or even just a single thing, but especially when you're doing lots of things simultaneously. The rationale for first price in this context is you never have an incentive to bid more than your value. That in fact, in a first price auction, the price the buyer pays is just determined by their bid, and therefore there's no incentive to distort your bid because of the possibility that you might be a seller. So that is actually really nice. Yes. And so in contrast, in the simultaneous ascending clock, which is the ICANN auction, there is such an incentive, and we're going to see that played out. So basically, we're going to do a horse race between these two.
That's because they're not sellers in that one, right?
Well, in the ICANN, they're not, and they get full efficiency.
Not sellers.
Right. But in my version, they are, and there is that incentive, and we'll see that. So both approaches have proven successful. Both have some merit. I'm going to argue that actually simultaneous ascending clock makes a lot more sense, especially in this context when the last resort auction is simultaneous ascending clock. I've already talked about the holdout problem, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore, except to say that the big guys, like donuts, need the small guys, and the small guys need the big guys. So basically, everybody needs everybody, so let's be one big happy family. So contracts, it's actually extremely important stuff, and it's extremely straightforward. So I'll skip over that. Bids have to be binding, believe it or not. That's a good idea. So you have deposits, okay, and you've got a cash deposit. You want to use cash deposit. You don't want to use a bid bond. Bid bonds are you use bonds when performance is difficult to measure and likely involves litigation. You use deposits when you have black and white performance.
Wait, what is the 20%? Why 20% and off what?
20%.
You put 20% down. When you're making
Yeah.
a bid of $100, you better put 20
You got it.
down.
Yeah, you got it.
Also,
Yeah,
people
and
that come with tons of cash.
and you can update it.
We put good faith bids
Yeah.
on a house.
Yeah, that's right. You don't have to have tons of cash, and in fact, simultaneous ascending, we're going to adjust your deposit as you become a seller. So let's say you're doing many, we'll adjust any of your winnings as seller. We're going to go into your deposit. So and as the price goes up and it becomes too rich, then you feed more money in. You make another wire to Citibank. So it's actually no problem. Settlement, straightforward. Experimental testing. Okay, so this is neat. So now we got to test this. So look, here we are. These are PhD students in the lab at the University of Maryland. We've got a very nice lab. Here's 16 PhD students intently making tons of money. I paid them $412 per session on average, and each. So yeah, I paid them lots of money. Exactly. Right. So these are very happy PhD students, extremely well motivated. They are, they've got a lot of money on the line right now, and they had the instructions in advance. They could study them. They could bring in their computers. They could access the cloud. They could do all kinds of things, and they actually did. They bid very well.
I think it's irrelevant. Could they collude?
They could not collude. Yeah. So antitrust, Department of Justice was enforcing antitrust matters. They could not collude. And in fact, the nice thing about an auction in which the money stays within, the incentive to collude is much reduced than in an auction where it's the money is all going to the seller. So that's actually a very important point, that collusion is actually much less of a problem
Right,
in this setting.
Because you could get flipped from a buyer to a seller at any point,
Yeah.
at which point your collusion would actually
Right.
be heard.
And in fact, the instrument that we're doing is exactly what the instrument would be if we perfectly colluded together. Now, this is essentially a knockout auction that a bidding ring would run were they to perfectly collude. So we're actually already, and it's perfectly appropriate in this case. We've been instructed to resolve this privately, and we're just resolving it efficiently. So that's why you're absolutely right that it's not that relevant in this context.
The whole group is ex post happy in the sense that no coalition can form?
I'm not 100% sure about that, but yes. So how did we do this experiment? We framed the experiment in the exact same context as real life. So we took the 16 largest and said, okay, all the 16 are in, and they're all in for all of their domains. Then this turns out to be the domains that get auctioned. These are the 16 bidders, and I had the 8 largest bidders played by humans, the 8 smallest bidders played by computers, and they hit it off. And the reason for that is the smaller guys, it would actually be too boring to play those roles. So that's why I limited it to top 8. So everybody had an interesting, fun thing to do. So the treatments were sequential first price sealed bid, simultaneous ascending clock, so the 2 designs. And then I did symmetric independent private value was one treatment. And the second treatment was asymmetric distributions. So then we've got actually some bidders, like Google, you know Google is a strong bidder, right? They got lots of cash in the bank and so on. So they're going to be a strong bidder for .book. And Amazon's going to be a strong bidder for .book. But then this guy we've never heard of, he's probably not so strong. So we're going to assume that's common knowledge. So we've got 2 different distributions, a strong distribution and a weak distribution, and see whether it's the results are robust to that asymmetry. We do this on commercial auction platform, state-of-the-art commercial auction platform. Here's a picture. It's incredibly easy to use. It's incredibly powerful. It's used for tens of billions of dollars of auctions and works really well and is easily customized to this setting. Experimental results. One advantage of this the simultaneous ascending is we get the price discovery. And so the really valuable stuff, there's lots of price discovery. It settles, it clears very late. Whereas sequential first price, it's things that just sort of constant flow through time. Efficiency. Take a look at this. This looks pretty boring, but what it's saying is all these auctions work incredibly well. We're getting over 98% efficiency all the time. All the treatments, and this is with PhD students who understand game theory, understand auction theory, and have been, had some time to check things out. And in fact, we solved, differential equations for them, as I am for the real bid. It's consistent with the real framing. The real bidders in this auction, they have hired experts. Perhaps some of you have been called. Experts have been hired. They've been retained. They're doing analysis. They're solving differential equations. And so this is the real environment. There were deviations from the theory. They didn't just do, and the theory I'm saying is it's actually the theory you can't actually solve the real problem, but you can solve something that looks pretty close. If you assume that the values are all, the draws are all independent. So in this case, there's no complementarities. And in that case, there are actually budget constraints. So they did actually have budgets, and actually only 3 of the 16 bidders were budget constrained. And so that can affect things too. But even still, they weren't that budget constrained, and they, which explains why they could achieve such high efficiency. Okay, you can look at the data to see what they did, and they actually performed quite well. But it's not perfect. There's dots all over the place. But the dots are such that it rarely affected the outcome in a very adverse way. We got 100% efficiency, I think like 87% of the time, or and then the rest of the time we got very high efficiency, so 98% efficiency overall. There are some deviations. They're not that exciting. This is my favorite way to look at the bidding behavior. This is with n equals 2. Then I can plot what the equilibrium is there in orange, and this is the 4 different treatments. And you can see that they're actually pretty close. And what happens is I add bidders. the auction becomes more competitive. And guess what? They start to bid closer to the 45-degree line. So that line's just going to shift up, and you'll see that. But you'll see there's sort of a tight window all the way through, and which is why they're all performing well. And here's the line shifting up, and we're sticking, with the equilibrium. But basically, there was a tendency to underbid, to not bid as strategically as the equilibrium says, and as a result, that's why the asymmetric case, they basically didn't take advantage of the asymmetry quite as much as they should have, and as a result, we aren't getting and that 98%, that's with respect to the ex post first best, which is actually not achievable in the asymmetric case, in theory. Okay, but we're actually probably, we should calculate what the percentage is, but I believe that we're doing just as well as the theory, and perhaps even better in the asymmetric case. Whereas the symmetric case, the theory says we should get 100% efficiency because we've got a symmetric increasing bid function. So conclusion is, market design is incredibly powerful. You can take real problems and throw the methodology and the technology at it, and it actually comes up with great results. Here's just one application that's a fun application. It's not this is involving hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not it's not like solving Medicare, or electricity markets or telecom markets around the world, but it is an important step and I think useful, but it is a good illustration of the methodology. There are some limitations to the analysis. Some of them we've tried to address, like dealing with the asymmetry. One, we've assumed independent private value. What happens? The values are certainly correlated, right? So what happens with correlated values? Well, we've solved the general symmetric model, and we just solved it. It's not in the paper yet. It's on my hard drive, and I will put it into the paper real soon. We've got some I's to dot and some T's to cross, and we'll do that. And that will be one more. But actually, there's another limitation, which is the real world, we don't have the base of common knowledge. And in practice, as a result, simultaneous ascending auctions are much more robust. The reason the first price sealed bid does so well is because of that base of common knowledge. Without that base of common knowledge, first price sealed bid would not do nearly as well as it did here. And so we actually have a lot of experience with ascending auction processes. They do extremely well, even robust to an absence of common knowledge. So, thank you very much.
What if you don't have private values? Like suppose Amazon doesn't care if Donuts buys like book.book, but really doesn't want Google to buy .book.
Okay, so that's externalities. So what if we have externalities? Well, yeah, so we've solved the correlated case, general symmetric model, but that doesn't include externalities as well. If we have externalities, then it's a nightmare. So I don't know. I won't have anything useful to say right now. But I do know that that's going to, with respect to any other plan or any other auction, that's going to be a potential issue too. I don't think the externalities are too large, with a few exceptions. And I think .book would be the illustration of where you might have an externality, where you have guys that have significant market power in a particular space, and they actually care. With respect to the externalities, this is the auction form that's described here is actually pretty good, because the information that we're revealing during the ascending clock is just the information about aggregate demand. So we're not revealing the identities, which then would create a lot more strategic aspects to exploit the externalities.
quite understand why there's externalities here. I mean, if some random guy buys a book, they could still sell it to Amazon or Google.
That's correct.
So
yeah.
doesn't that kind of wash it out?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. You're right. Because there is.
You can imagine things, but they seem like much more of a stretch.
Right, exactly. Yeah. No, there is resale, and it's very difficult to ban resale.
There's no attempt being made to ban resale.
No, it's definitely not. It's no attempt to be made. Yeah. Thank you.